Do you have official time?
Yeah, officially we're on.
We're good to go. Good morning. All right. Welcome. Welcome to Derry's issue class this first Sunday in November. We're delighted that you're here and that you've figured out the time. Maybe some of you have been waiting for an hour for this to begin. I hope not. But welcome to those who are present with us today and for those who are with us online. My name's Debbie Hough, and there was a time when I served this congregation as the Director of Christian Education. It's been a few years now, but I'm delighted to be here to take a quick look at the Reformation and show you some sites that I was able to see, privileged to see in Switzerland. The timing of this is because last Sunday was the last Sunday in October. The church, and I mean church with a capital C, designates as Reformation Sunday. So we're pretty close in time, but there's no bad time really to take a look at the Reformation. So thrilled to be here with you today. And I want to start, we're going to fly through the Reformation and we're going to look at this through Presbyterian lenses. That's really the only way I know how to do it. We're going to focus a little more on that, but we're not going to spend tons of time with anybody in any place and anything. So I hope the characterizations are not too grossly overstated, but they will be, I'm sure. And I hope I'm not too inaccurate, but I'm going to apologize already because I'm sure I will be at times as well. This is a very complicated period of time with lots of moving parts, but we're going to just hit some of the highlights. The Reformation was not a day. It's years, centuries probably in the making, but it certainly doesn't begin with Martin Luther, although that's the day we celebrate. But there are others who have been struggling with the church and trying to call the church, and I say church, at that period was the Roman Catholic Church. They're struggling with that church for a number of reasons, but it doesn't begin with Martin Luther. There are lots of others. But why would Luther be successful? Before we try and answer that question, a couple of things that have been happening in this period of time or prior to this period of time. 500 years earlier was the big schism in the church, where the East and the West separated, never to come back together again. And the East is Orthodox, the West is Roman Catholic. So that has happened. The church is reeling because of that occurrence. And 500 years is not enough time for that to all settle down. And also, one of the major things that happens in this period is the invention of the printing press. Gutenberg invents the printing press, and the world will never be the same after that. There is a flourishing of thought in this period of time, in this part of the world, for sure. Lots of scholarship, lots of art. And I just listed a few of the names of people who are entering into this world to change it. Science is taking over. The church has a lot of influence in all of these areas: thought, science, art. So the church is still working to manage a lot of those things. And into this period of time, Martin Luther is born in Germany. There's also Spanish Inquisition is happening at this time. There's a lot of struggle with the church to control thought, control theology. It's a very important time for folks in their thinking who want to get it right. And the church is really trying to get a handle on that. In England, Henry VIII eventually becomes king, and that'll play a big part in what's happening with the church as well. And then you have a number of plagues. There are a lot of things health-wise that are happening during this period of time. So this is the day that we mark, October 31st. So that's why last Sunday would have been, we hit it right on the head. Usually Reformation Sunday is the one we get closest to October 31st. Martin Luther is a monk, and he has really been wrestling. He's a scholar. He's wrestling with the church, and he nails his 95 Theses, or otherwise known as complaints, on the door of the Castle Church in Wittenberg, Germany. There used to be a magazine, I don't know if you recall this magazine way back when, the Wittenberg Door, which was a playful look at church and society. I don't think it exists anymore, but always looking at things from a different angle. So it was famous for a number of reasons. So why does Luther succeed? And things certainly move with great speed at this point. Martin Luther's a bright guy. He's very smart. He's a scholar. He studies languages. He can translate scripture. He's got issues himself. But he has this opportunity in a monastery to study. He's a teacher, and he begins to really study scripture. And it's thought that it was studying the book of Romans that really blew the water out of the tub for him. And he didn't look at the Bible the same after Romans, and he didn't look at the church the same after studying this. And he really felt like the church was not giving people correct information, what they needed to know. He starts writing, prolific writer, and now you have a printing press, and you can get your thoughts out. Now, not everybody can read, probably not very many people can read, but you can listen, and people can read these things to you. So he is writing many things. And Luther's connected. Luther has friends in high places, in princes and different things. And when he has to flee, he's been up for treason and heresy. He flees. He's hidden until it's safe to come back out again. And so he's well connected. And then at about this time, Henry VIII breaks with the church and forms the Church of England. So the ground is shaking in a variety of ways, and churches are, here's a new church. And Luther eventually breaks with the Catholic Church, takes off his monk's robe, and forms a new church. So the Lutheran Church is formed. And stop me at any time. Whatever I can do to answer a question, I'll be happy to try that. Now, at the same time Luther's doing his thing in Germany, it's happening in other places. People are finding out about what Luther is saying, what others are saying, and they're studying these things, and Switzerland becomes a hotbed of the Reformation. There are things that are happening in these cities, Geneva, Strasbourg, Zurich, and Basel. Lots of things happening. And I had the opportunity to go and take a trip in Switzerland. I don't know if anybody has been to Switzerland, to these places. It's an amazing place. And when I went, what was so helpful to me was this little tiny relief map that I picked up where I could figure out, where are we? What does Switzerland look like? It's not very big, but it's bordered by France. France comes around here. You got Germany up at the top here, Deutschland. You can see Deutschland up there. and then you're coming down around, and it's Austria, and you come down around, and it's Italy. So it's bordered by a host of these places. So Geneva's down here. Geneva would be important, and Basel's way up there. Zurich is another very important place in all of this. And I'm not sure exactly right now where Strasbourg is, but
It's a little further north.
yeah, I can't see it on here, but that's another key spot for all of this. But you can get a feel for how Switzerland has to deal with where it's located. And gosh, the history that's coming and going. But Switzerland's not an easy place to get through. You just don't go through Switzerland because of these Alps. So it's a very, very interesting place. But that little map was about as helpful as anything I did when I was there. First thing we're going to take a look at is a contemporary of Martin Luther who starts the Swiss Reformation. And his name is Ulrich Zwingli. I just think that's fun to say. Ulrich Zwingli. I don't know if you know, very, very influential person. He didn't live all that long. He becomes a priest. Then he is named the preacher at the big church in Zurich, and we're going to look at that in a moment. He starts the Swiss Reformation as he begins preaching. That word starts to permeate. He's very fiery preacher. And he eventually fights in a political battle, and he's killed. So he's quite an interesting person. I thought it was worth taking a little bit of time, and I'm going to pull some extra information in from things we never get to see. These are bulletin inserts that the Presbyterian Historical Society puts out every year for Reformation Sunday. So I want to share a little bit. The start of the Swiss Reformation is credited to Zwingli's sermons on the New Testament, preached in 1519. In 1523, before the Council of Zurich, Zwingli presented and defended his doctrines in a public disputation. His theses included establishing the Bible as the sole basis of truth and rejecting the authority of the Pope. These are big. The Mass, saints, fasting, and clerical celibacy. Supported by the city council, Zwingli's church reforms were rapidly put into effect. Those are all major, major changes that Zwingli gets started. Never hear about Zwingli, but he's very, very important. Now, just so you don't think he's just a pastor of some little country church. No. No. He's the pastor of the Grossmünster in Zurich. This is a massive church. And, they're taking over Catholic cathedrals. They're taking over places that exist. And what they do when they go in there is they whitewash. They take away a lot of the symbolism in these churches, destroying things. Iconoclasm is a big part of this period of time. Works of art are gone. There's lots of movement in recent years to restore a lot of those things and to dig under and see what was once covered up. And there's some phenomenal things, but this is a humongous church. And this is, there's a postcard here, and I have it on the back table here. I don't read German, so I have no idea. But these massive doors that are just full of symbolism. And they're symbols that they recall, but they take away a lot. But we're going to come back to Zwingli towards the end, because Zwingli has a great influence on American Presbyterianism. And I don't have the answer as to why, but we'll come back to that. Ulrich Zwingli. Now, this is the Swiss reformer that we know, and that's John Calvin. Again, someone who doesn't live all that long. He's a contemporary with Luther at the end of Luther's life. So Calvin is considered a second generation reformer. Zwingli would have been first generation. Zwingli and Luther would have been contemporaries. They met, they disagreed, but then Calvin comes in at this point in time. And I have a picture here of, if you walk up the ramp here at the church, you'll see these windows. We have a little Reformation history that you can use or recall some of these events. Excuse me. But they all have symbols. They all have things that stand for them. Luther's is like the Rose of Sharon, kind of. You see that symbol, you know Luther. You know Lutheranism. This is Calvin's symbol, the hand outstretched with the heart. And that's because his seal, his motto is, "My heart I give thee, Lord, eagerly and sincerely." Oh, I have my Calvin bobblehead here, but not too many people have one of those, but I thought I would bring that to you, my little Calvin. Calvin is a lay person. He's not a priest. He's a student. He's part of a family who has some means. His father wants him to study, to do these things. He wants him to be a lawyer. He studies that. He excels in language, Latin, philosophy. He's a brilliant guy. And he's going to go study theology, and then his father wants him to study law. So he does do that. He studies law. He doesn't like law. But I think we can see some of the benefits of the legal mind of Calvin. He does marry. His wife passes away. He does have a baby son who doesn't survive. This is my thinking. Anybody who does Myers-Briggs, I think he has to be an INTJ. Now, you can argue with me about that. Calvin just wants to be left alone. He wants to study. He wants to think. He wants to write. And he's never allowed to just do that. So the introvert Calvin is just being forced out in public, left and right. He's well known by many circles as the person who had Servetus burned at the stake, without explaining why that happens. It's true, but why does this happen? And by the time this happens, he is settled in Geneva. And that takes a while for that to happen too, but he's settled in Geneva. Geneva is sort of a theocracy. It's a city-state kind of a thing. Church and civil government are working closely together. It's not separation of church and state like we know it. This is together, church and state. That's how Calvin sees it should work. So the church is running Geneva. Thinking, thought, heresy, all of that's, they're very careful. The Roman Catholic Church has been battling heresy for a long time. Now that the Protestant church is out there, so do they. Because now the door is open for thinking and for creating churches. The door is open now. So they're trying to be very careful here. Servetus is a Spanish theologian and a physician. And in 1553, he starts writing letters to Calvin. They create a correspondence. And Servetus writes some things that are very anti-Trinitarian. And that Calvin can't put up with. You can't speak badly of the Trinity. You can't do that. So Calvin sends him some of his writings. Servetus criticizes these mightily. And Calvin says in a letter to Servetus, "I neither hate you nor despise you, nor do I wish to persecute you, but I would be as hard as iron when I behold you insulting sound doctrine with so great audacity." The correspondence begins to pick up in temperature. And they tell Servetus, stay away, stay away. But Servetus is also against infant baptism. Again, he denies the Trinity, and the French Catholic Inquisition condemns Servetus to death. So he's getting it from his own people. But he escapes. He's been in prison, but he escapes. But on the way, he thinks, I'll just pop into Geneva, which Calvin has said to him, stay away. Don't come. So he comes, and the officials in Geneva, not Calvin, but the officials in Geneva bring him to trial. So he stands trial for heresy in Geneva. Calvin wanted him to be, this is going to sound, decapitated. That's what you do to a traitor. But the council says no, he is a heretic. So heretics are burnt at the stake. So that's what happens. Servetus puts himself right in the middle of it. I don't know what he thought was going to happen, or he would become a martyr for greater things, which doesn't happen. But he doesn't stay away. He's encouraged to do that. He doesn't do it. Now, in Calvin's Geneva, Calvin, the student, preaches. He's a preacher now. That's not what he wanted to be, but now he's a preacher. And he preaches almost every day and twice on Sundays. And his sermons could go for 2 hours plus. And he never used any notes. See, originally Calvin was going to go to Strasbourg and study. That's what he wants to do. He just wants to study. So on the way, he meets a guy named William Farel, who is he's a contemporary in time with Luther. And he meets William Farel. Farel is a local church leader when Calvin makes this detour into Geneva. And Farel is one of the leaders in Geneva. And Calvin says, I'm only going to stay one night. But Farel argues that God has told him it's God's will that Calvin stays in Geneva. And Calvin says, I just want to go study in Strasbourg. Farel says, no. God's telling me you are a preacher and you have to stay in Geneva. And in fact, God is going to curse all your studies unless you stay here in Geneva and become a preacher. Calvin says later, I felt as if God from heaven had laid his mighty hand upon me to stop me in my course. And I was so terror-stricken that I did not continue my journey. What a way to start your pastorate in a city you didn't want to be in. But Calvin stays. It's a rocky road in Geneva. He gets kicked out every once in a while. The council says, out of here, we're not doing this. And then they go find him, bring him back. And then they'll kick him out again, and they bring him back. And eventually, Geneva is where he lives and dies. But he still gets to study. He is a prolific writer. And he writes commentaries on almost every book of the Bible. This sets up in our church library, Calvin's commentaries. And I encourage you, if you're ever doing any Bible study, just go take a peek, see what Calvin says about these. Often it's very insightful, even back that far in time. And he wrote letters, and a lot of his letters are still in existence. He wrote to all kinds of people. As a pastor, encouraging people, praying for people. He wrote lots and lots of prayers. He's just an amazing, amazing person. Calvin's most well-known writings are the Institutes of the Christian Religion. Here's a picture of my beat-up set. They're back there if you want to take a look at them. He started this in 1536. That's when he wrote his first volume of the Institutes of the Christian Religion, intended to kind of explain theology and to be used with students. He redid it again in 1539, and that, by all accounts, was his favorite edition. But anytime something new popped up, a question in theology that he hadn't dealt with, he would redo these. Now, when he redoes these, he writes them in Latin and he writes them in French. He writes them. So he's thinking these through, he rewrites these. I mean, there's no quick fix for editing these things. And they're amazingly interesting. So they've been translated into English several times. This was the set that I used when I took a Calvin course at Princeton. They're very, very interesting. And they're very interesting if you outline them. And if you take a look in mine, you'll see my outline of the chapters. And it was interesting for me because later coming on are the Calvinists. The Puritans are Calvinists. And they write the Westminster Confession of Faith. And this is what Presbyterians are known for. You may all have been encountered at some point by somebody saying, "Oh, you're Presbyterian. You believe in predestination." That's not Calvin. That's not Calvin. If you want to find the doctrine of election in Calvin's Institutes of Faith, you have to really work. He does it, he talks about it, but it's very far down in his book. In the Westminster Confession of Faith, it's the first thing. They take Calvin's theology and flip it. So you can't blame Calvin for being a predestinarian. He's not. But he has to deal with it because it's in the Bible. That's Paul's thinking. Paul's talking about some things. Calvin has to deal with it, so he does write about it, but it makes him nervous. But not the Westminster divines. It's first in their thinking. But they're very interesting if you want to know what Calvin thinks. That's it. Calvin wrote catechisms. He wrote different things. It's interesting to me that in our Book of Confessions, which came out in 1967 with the Confession of 67, there's nothing in there that Calvin wrote in our Confessions of Faith. It's been attempted to get something by Calvin in the Book of Confessions, but it has never passed. It's harder to change the Book of Confessions than anything else, but nothing he wrote's ever gotten in there. Now, if you've been to Geneva, I'm sure you've seen this. This is the immense statues that are in a park. These are reformers. Now, you might try and guess who these people are. I looked online, and almost half of what I saw online identifying these were wrong. This is William Farel, the first guy Calvin encounters. And it's interesting to me, he's the only one whose hand is in a fist. This is Calvin. And you might also notice Calvin's the tallest. Now, was that true in life? I don't know. But he's the biggest of the statues. This is a guy named Theodore Beza. And Beza replaces Calvin when Calvin dies. Theodore Beza takes over in Geneva. And this, how'd he get in there? This is John Knox. We're definitely going to come back to Knox here. This is an impressive statue, for sure. Now, Geneva was a sanctuary. Geneva was a place where refugees from all over the place, but from France, we remember France goes around. Calvin himself finds refuge in Geneva when the Protestants are being attacked in France. Remember, like French Huguenots? There's a lot of turmoil in France. He was a Geneva immigrant, and his first prolonged stay in the city came years before when war in Germany prevented him from getting to Strasbourg. That's why he has to make detours. He's trying to get to Strasbourg, but he can't get there. So as he stays in Geneva, he helps create an atmosphere in Geneva welcoming to outsiders. You're welcome to come to Geneva. He establishes a hospital for refugees as well as an academy for education. And he's, again, you're going to, how did we get to, as a denomination, to be so well known for education standards? It comes back to Calvin in many ways. And John Knox was a refugee. When Mary Tudor, Mary Queen of Scots, takes over and tries to make Scotland Catholic again, she and Knox butt heads, and Luther flees for his life, and he ends up in Geneva. Knox, yeah. Did I keep saying Luther? No. Luther, I don't believe, ever went to Geneva. Knox ends up in Geneva. And while he's there, he studies with Calvin. He becomes a student of Calvin. And Calvin also gives Knox a pulpit. There are 3 churches in Geneva. And he gives Knox a pulpit for the refugees who speak English. So Knox preaches in Geneva. But Calvin does a lot of lecturing in an auditorium, which we'll see here in a minute. But Knox marveled at his time in Geneva, calling it the most perfect school of Christ that ever was in the earth since the days of the apostles. It must have been an amazing place to go, to think, and to be. One other thing about Geneva, there's a Bible that comes out of Geneva, a translation of the Bible into English that comes out of there called the Geneva Bible. And the Geneva Bible is created for the English Protestants to use. And it's a famous Bible. It's the first Bible to add verses to the chapters. So you can thank those scholars in Geneva for adding verses so you can find your way around in this Bible. It's also the first Bible. They did detailed notes, all in the margins, all over the place, detailed notes. So it's considered the first study Bible. And it's also the Bible that comes to America when the Puritans come. They bring the Geneva Bible, not King James. So they come with the Geneva Bible. It's a very important, very influential Bible. Comes out of Geneva. Now, Calvin taught in this auditorium. You can still see it today. But he influenced so many people. But Calvin worked on civil government. There's a big chapter in the Institutes about how the government should function, influenced by religion, influenced by the Bible. And he led initiatives for free education, relief for the poor, hospital construction, prison reform, improved sanitation systems, consumer protection laws, provision for refugees. I don't know if I could live in a city under Calvin's influence, but it sounds pretty good. Pretty good. His Geneva Academy attracted students from all over Europe, and when he died, he had 1,200 students on the roll. And between 1542 and 1560, he made provision for an estimated 5,000 refugees fleeing to Geneva to escape religious opposition. So it's got to be a phenomenal place to be a part of. So you can see why Geneva becomes sort of the flashpoint for the Reformation as we know it from Presbyterians. But he's very careful about what he says about government, that elected officials are under God's provision, whether you like them or not. They will be serving God no matter what. So there's a kind of a picture inside of the auditorium, and if you can imagine him sitting and lecturing. I'm guessing he does it, I don't know if he speaks in Latin, I'm guessing he speaks in French. He is French. But in Switzerland, you can speak French and German. I mean, I think of Roger Federer, and how many languages does that man speak? A lot. But you need to, because you're surrounded by these countries. Probably reads Italian, probably, even if you don't speak it, I'm sure you can read these languages as well. Now, again, it's not a small church. That's just the spire you see, that green. That's St. Peter's or St. Pierre's, whichever way. That's Calvin's church in Geneva. I don't know why else I would have taken this picture, but I think this might be his pulpit in St. Peter's, where this is a big place. But I could be wrong about that. But this is the place where he preaches. These were Catholic cathedrals. There's a choir up there. If you've been in these big cathedrals, way up in the front, you have these choirs that line that chancel area. That's the choir. And this is his chair in St. Peter's. There's all kinds of carvings in there. I thought if you happen to pick that seat in the choir, you better sing good, or you better be good. That looks a little scary, that character. And underneath St. Peter's today, they are excavating, and they're finding all kinds of Roman ruins. It's an amazing place to be. So you can go down and take a look at all the things they're uncovering that were these cathedrals in the city are built on top of. And clearly Rome was there and had done a lot of construction. Very interesting tile work there, but there's lots more there. There's also a Reformation Museum attached to all these buildings, the cathedral, the auditorium. There's a Reformation Museum. Very, very interesting. And some of you may have seen a picture of Marie with her face in that Calvin thing there where you can get your picture taken like you're Calvin. So that's at the museum. Now this sculpture was back in that park where the Reformation statues were. And now we're coming more Presbyterian here with one of Calvin's students. It's a picture of him preaching. I don't know if you can see that there. John Knox. And I'm guessing this is preaches Reformation at St. Giles. And this is in Edinburgh. And I'm not sure what devant means. I think it's probably not good. Against, oh. Uh-huh. Okay, I have a computer. I don't know if we get a...
You have a computer?
Do I? I can see. You can't see. There we go. Huh. Could have been worse. I think in time we'll get back to this. But this is John Knox, and he's preaching against Mary, Queen of Scots. In 1561, if you're okay, I'll keep going. Remember, it's a picture of John preaching. It made a big beep when it came on the first time. What do you think? Let me just, while we're waiting, I'll talk about John Knox here a little bit. 1561, Two of Scotland's most famous expatriates have recently come home. Mary Stuart, the Catholic Queen of Scots, and John Knox. Now, talk about two opposites are coming home at the same time. More than religion separates the two. 3 years before, Knox published a controversial polemic attacking Mary Stuart and the other ruling queens of Britain. This is an interesting title here. Don't electrocute yourself, Charlie. Here's this thing. Oh, that's the right sound. That's the right sound. John Knox writes this, I don't know if it's a pamphlet or what it is. The first blast of the trumpet against the monstrous regiment of women. Mary, Elizabeth, John, and Mary's mother, who's another very powerful woman. So, even Elizabeth, who leans Protestant, is not happy with John Knox. So Elizabeth won't allow him to come through England to go anywhere. He's refused any passage into England. But he ends up in, back to Scotland, 1561, Queen Mary learns of a sermon Knox delivers at St. Giles Cathedral, protesting a mass she led, and she summons the trumpet of the Reformation to her palace and accuses him of promoting rebellion, sedition, slaughter, publishing a book attacking her and her mother's authority. Knox believes that unlawful monarchs can and should be resisted by force. Mary charges Knox with treason, but eventually his trial ends in embarrassment, and Knox wins. Mary is gone. Knox stays. Scotland is Presbyterian. And Knox is the Presbyterian founder. Calvin is the founder of Reformed theology. There are several families under that Reformed umbrella. Knox takes it and it becomes Presbyterian. Knox writes several books. He writes several things. Scott's Confession, which is in the Book of Confessions. And he writes a Book of Common Order. And he writes a Book of Discipline. All of these you might know. Eventually, we get a Book of Order, which has a directory for worship in it and a book of discipline in it and historical principles. I think Knox would have been very pleased with our Book of Order, which keeps getting adapted. They're working on the updating the Book of Discipline right now. And we do have a Knox window upstairs, but definitely the Presbyterianism that we celebrate today. Except there's something that all these reformers differ on, and it's communion. Zwingli and Luther meet. They agree on a lot of things except communion. Calvin and Luther meet. They agree on almost everything except communion. Now, you might know the Catholics have transubstantiation, where the elements physically change. Luther took that down a notch, but it's still in the ballpark, and Lutherans believe in consubstantiation. The elements, there's a change with these elements still. For Zwingli, no. And for Zwingli, he really ratchets down communion a lot. And Luther doesn't come down as far as Zwingli comes down in what happens at communion. For Calvin comes to what he calls the presence of Christ. Christ is really present. Nothing happens to the elements. You started with ordinary bread, you end with ordinary bread. Same thing with the cup. But what changes is Christ is present at communion. And for Zwingli, not even that. It's a memorial meal. You celebrate to remember. Calvin felt that every time the word is rightly proclaimed, the sacraments should be rightly administered. And when you do those two things, there you have a church. Zwingli, at most, 4 times a year you celebrate communion. Now, I don't know about you. If you grew up Presbyterian, if you did, maybe your church was like mine. We had communion 4 times a year. You're shaking your heads, yes. That is Zwingli. How did Zwingli win in American Presbyterianism? I don't know that. Knox studied with Calvin. But what happened in the United States was Zwingli won in communion. And we just did it 4 times a year. Now, the Book of Order now says 4 times minimum. 4 times minimum. You have to have communion at least 4 times. Calvin would just have been appalled at that. If you're preaching, you have communion. So Calvin would have had communion every time. I remember back when Dick Hough started to open the door to more communions. And there was some controversy about that. We're becoming Catholic. No, we're becoming Calvin. We're going back to Calvin. We rediscovered Calvin and Calvin's theology. And I'm guessing you still do it here every month, at least once a month, and probably some months more than that. Session has to approve whenever communion is celebrated, but it's going to be at least once a month, except Tuesday nights. If you come to worship here on Tuesday, you're going to have communion. We had it opened up that far. And a lot of people were like, okay, communion, it's not going to have any meaning anymore if you do it too much. I can say with all honesty, as someone who did Tuesday nights, that because I'm working, I couldn't worship on Sunday morning. I could Tuesday night. It never lost meaning. It just expanded. Because each week I was a little different. My situation was a little different. The presentation was a little different. Communion just got so much bigger and nuanced. Calvin would say, yes, whenever you have worship and you preach, you do communion. But I do not know, and anybody who's listening to this, point me in the direction to help me know how Zwingli won the United States. And we didn't know it was Zwingli. I don't have an answer for that, but I do know that to be true. Because we all experienced it. Everybody present here was a 4 times a year communion person. Now, today in Geneva, modern Geneva, today it's where the World Council of Churches set up its headquarters. You know, the church around the world coming together. You know, the Great Schism split the Catholic Church into East and West. Protestantism split it. Oh my gosh, it just exploded into denominations. We entered the world of denominationalism. The World Council of Churches is an attempt to have those denominations, those schisms, have a place to come and talk, have a place to come and what do we have in common as opposed to what we are different. Will we ever all come together? I can't quite imagine that. I mean, I don't know how many different Presbyterian denominations there are. There are a lot. We don't all agree, and when we disagree to a certain point, then we break up. It just is how once it started, it keeps going. We're still breaking up today, not just Presbyterians, but Methodists, and you hear those rumbles all over the place, and we break up for lots of different issues, but that's still happening. But this is a place where it's safe for the world to come back together. This is a phenomenal space, the World Council of Churches. They have things from all over the world that are there you can look at, and different places for worship. That's a cross from Africa, which is really interesting, has the African continent on that. And when we were there, the gentleman who was kind of running things, the guy in the white shirt, is named Ted Gill. He's since retired, but he was from Princeton, Presbyterian from Princeton, but he was over there high up into the World Council of Churches. But I've never seen so many drums, in terms of like African drums and drums around the world. You kind of walked around, and there behind a panel was a wall full of these drums. And you could only imagine a worship service with a drum choir. It just had been, but here's a place where a lot of things can happen, a lot of conversation. Geneva's still a place where you're welcome. Come to Geneva. Well, what's next? We were blessed a number of years ago to have Phyllis Tickle here. She has since passed away, but she was the religion editor for Publishers Weekly, so all religious books came across her desk. And she had a theory that, and it's not just hers, I don't think, but she put it into words. Every 500 years, she called it, the church has a rummage sale. You just throw the whole thing up. We've talked about a couple of them. The Great Schism in the, I don't know how you even say that, the 1054 when that happened. Big, massive change. 500 years, you're at the Reformation. And they called it the Great Reformation. 500 more years, here we are. And I think everybody here knows the shifts are seismic that are happening today, not just here, but around the world. Social, political, economic, intellectual, cultural. We are in a period of time as volatile and as stimulating as they were in the Reformation period. Science going crazy, anti-science. I mean, you're all over the place, right, left, black, white. There's so much stuff that's happening, and we're all sifting our way through that. The church as well. The church is changing dramatically. If you had a home church someplace, it may or may not still be there. Church is opening, church is closing, denominations growing, denominations shrinking. Most of us grew up in a period of time after World War II where the church just exploded here in the United States. If you build it, they will come. And if you build it big, it'll fill up. Christian church just went crazy after World War II. But a lot of people on a theological level were very cautious about that. They were like, this is not what should be happening. This is not good. It's not theologically, biblically, what the church is called to be. But the church, you couldn't stop it. The church was just growing like crazy. And now today, a lot of places are dealing with buildings they can't maintain. What is faithful stewardship today? Is it to keep a building going? Is it to close? Is it to go back to house churches? What's faithful today? What's God calling the church to do and be? We're living in this period of time. If Phyllis Tickle is correct, and I would guess she probably is, the church will come out of this, but I don't know what it'll look like. I know it'll look different, but I don't know what it'll look like. But I think with all certainty could say God's in charge. It'll be what God wants it to be. And it'll be amazing. I mean, the church in many ways is flipped hemispheres. What's happening in the southern hemisphere is what happened here after World War II. But it's not the church your mother and father knew. It's Pentecostal. It's evangelical. It's very different. And where will this all play out? I do not know. Hard to say. Hard to say. But it's exciting to think about and to live through. And I invite you to come back in March, because Lee Barrett's going to struggle with this, on this, the ecclesiology of the church. What's the church called to be? That's where we need to focus. What's God want a church to be? Calvin would have said, you preach right, you have communion. That's a church. Knox would say, you preach right, you have sacraments, and you have discipline. That's a church. What will it be years from now? I don't know. I hope I live to see it. I just don't know what it'll be. A couple of things just for fun here at the end. As many of you know Mark Smith, who was a member here at Derry. Mark, on Reformation Sunday, Mark sent me a picture. He's greeting trick-or-treaters when he says, Ulrich Zwingli and John Knox, are you two from that reform school? You have to know Mark, and you have to know some Reformation history to know. Oh my goodness, that's hysterical. And one other last thing, influence of Calvin. My favorite comic of all time, Calvin and Hobbes. And Bill Watterson never hid the fact that Calvin's named for John Calvin. Now, was Calvin that ornery in real life? I don't know. But I thought this was pretty interesting. When Hobbes asked, is this how you sign your reports? Calvin, the super genius? And he says, it kind of inclines you to read it more charitably, don't you think? I invite you, read Calvin more charitably. Thank you. Questions? Questions?
While these forebears were writing and studying and preaching, how were they supported? I mean, how did they earn a living?
Well, sometimes you had a prince as a benefactor. Yeah, like Luther. Yeah, there's a lot of government stuff in connection there. And probably through offerings, like we still do today, some of that. And Calvin's helping run a city, so there's probably some recompense with all of that too. But a lot of these, I'm not sure about Knox, but I'm guessing there's some offering piece to that. I don't know if you're charged a certain amount to be a member. I'm sure they have this figured out, but there were princes who often would support some of these people. There was a prince who hid Luther while he was in trouble. So it's a good question, because they have massive buildings here to take care of. I mean, these are big places. Still today, big places. That at least Zurich's, the Zwingli's church in Zurich and Calvin's in Geneva are in great shape. So how they're keeping all of that going, but they're kind of destination places as well, but very important in the Reformation. But good question, good question. Well, there's some things on the back table there for those of you with us online. You can't see that, but I invite